Good morning. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on all of these occasions on our heritage.org website. Would ask our guests here in-house if you'll be so kind to make that last check that cell phones have been turned off as a courtesy to our presenters. It is always appreciated. We will post the program later today on our Heritage homepage as well for your future reference. And of course, our internet viewers are welcome at any time to send questions or comments, simply emailing us at speaker@heritage.org. Hosting our discussion this morning is Lindsay Burke. Ms. Burke is the Will Skillman Fellow in Education Policy here at Heritage. She researches and writes on federal and state education issues. She focuses on two critical areas of education policy: reducing the federal role in education and empowering families with school choice. Her commentary, research, and op-eds have appeared in various newspapers and magazines, including the Washington Times, National Review Online, The Atlantic, Time, and Newsweek. She has also spoken on education reform issues across the country and internationally, and has appeared on numerous radio and television shows, including CNN and Fox News. She holds a bachelor's degree in politics from Hollins University and a master's of teaching degree in foreign language education from the University of Virginia. Please join me in welcoming Lindsay Burke. Lindsay?
Great, thanks, Sean, and thanks to all of you for being here today. It's so exciting to be able to discuss what we see as School Choice 2.0 as part of National School Choice Week this week, which is concluding tomorrow, I guess. It started last Saturday, so tomorrow's the last day, so we're getting in a few last events, and it's been a great week this year for National School Choice Week. National School Choice Week, this is the fourth year that it's been done. There were, I think, 5,500 events across the country this year, so it's really grown over the past 4 years. So I'm excited today to talk about ed savings accounts and how we sort of see this as a real, as Matt has said, refinement of Milton Friedman's original concept of school vouchers. So just a really quick overview of what ESAs are. Education savings accounts are currently only in Arizona. It's the first state that did this. They enacted it in 2011. And just a quick overview of where we are with American Ed. We all know the stats. American education, some people would argue, is in a state of crisis. If you look at math and reading achievement since the 1970s, it's been basically flat. We've seen a nominal increase in mathematics achievement over time, but if you look at reading achievement, you can see there for 17-year-old students, 17-year-old kids today read no better than 17-year-olds did in the 1970s. So seniors are really no better off today than they were back in the 1970s. Then if you look at graduation rates, we've seen a nominal uptick in graduation rates, especially over the last couple of years. I think we're around 78% now. But for various groups of students, that needle hasn't really moved very much. So if you look at African American students or Hispanic students, 66%, 71% graduation rates. So we've certainly continued to see gaps in academic attainment, which might be why we have seen American confidence in public schools decline so precipitously over the past few decades. It hovers around 29% right now. That's those Americans. This is a survey from Gallup that came out about a year and a half ago, asking whether or not you had confidence in your child's public school. 29%. Not a great track record. In the 70s, it was only about 58%. So, but we've seen that decline pretty precipitously over the past few years. So we have seen school choice programs proliferate across the country. I'm sure you're familiar with voucher options, tuition tax credit programs, charter schools, homeschooling. But what Arizona's done is they have said, we want to go all in on school choice. We want to take this School Choice 2.0 and really make sure parents can direct every single dollar of their child's educational funds to options that they believe meet their child's unique learning needs. And they've done that through education savings accounts. So just quickly, the way it works, parents get 90% of what the state would have spent deposited into their education savings account. It's referred to as an empowerment scholarship account in Arizona. Now that's 90% of what the state would have spent, so it's not the local funds and it's not federal funds, it's that state pot. But once parents receive that money, they can then use it to pay for private school tuition, textbooks, online learning, special education therapies, and a host of other education-related services or providers. And here's a list. that shows all of the eligible expenses. So you can see college tuition is in there. So that's one of the unique aspects of an education savings account, is that parents can roll over unused funds from year to year. This is a major innovation in school choice policy. You have parents that are now thinking about opportunity cost. Am I getting a good bang for my educational buck? And that ability to roll over those unused funds into a college savings account down the road has been really critical. So just quickly on the mechanics, children with special needs are eligible in Arizona to receive an ESA. Children assigned to D or F schools, Arizona rates their schools on a transparent A through F grading scale. Children in Arizona's foster care system from active duty military families, and now entering kindergarten children that also meet those eligibility criteria. So there are about 220,000 kids now in Arizona that are eligible for an ed savings account. And so, of course, the theory is empowering parents to finance multiple education services and providers at once would lead them to customize their child's education. So we wanted to test that theory a little bit and see how parents were actually utilizing their ed savings account dollars. And lo and behold, that's what they're doing. They are spending their ESA funds on a variety of education-related services and products. So you can see the bulk of that money does go to private school tuition, but they're also using it to buy curriculum, educational therapies, standardized tests, online learning courses, tutoring, all of the eligible expenses. Parents are utilizing their funds to finance those under state statute. So we also looked at the percentage of families in the ESA program that were taking advantage of the opportunity to roll over those unused funds year to year. And this is through the spring of the 2012-13 school year, so last school year. But as of the spring of last year, about 26% of those ed savings account funds remained unspent, giving a pretty good indication that parents were saving those funds in anticipation of future education expenses. And just finally on this point, the biggest finding that we've seen so far is that about a third of all families in Arizona in the ESA program are actually customizing their child's educational experience. So you see that big green pie slice there, about 65% are using them similar to a traditional school voucher. They're using that money to finance education at a single educational institution. So they're using it to pay for private school tuition at parochial school, at any special needs school, any private school that they think really meets their child's needs. But over a third, 34.5%, are doing a little different. Some of them are acting more like homeschoolers, where they are only purchasing curricula, textbooks, and hiring a private tutor to really customize their child's educational experience. Some of them do private school in the morning, part-day private school, but then use that tutoring option and curriculum option in the afternoon. So I think that that's a really critical point, that over a third are customizing. So just wanted to sort of lay the framework for where we are in Arizona today. As I mentioned, Arizona is the only state so far that's done it, but there are other states right now that are looking at this. Oklahoma is considering implementing an ed savings account option, so that's one that we'll follow closely over the next few months. But we have a great panel today to really flesh out this idea and get you jazzed up about ESAs, because I think we've all drank the ed savings account Kool-Aid, and we're all pretty jazzed up about it. So we're going to start with Matthew Ladner. Dr. Matthew Ladner is Senior Advisor of Policy and Research for the Foundation for Excellence in Education. He previously served as Vice President of Research at the Goldwater Institute. Prior to joining Goldwater, he was Director of State Projects at the Alliance for School Choice. He's written numerous studies on school choice, charter schools, and special education reform. He's testified before Congress, the United States Commission of Civil Rights, and numerous state legislative committees. He's a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin and received both a master's and PhD in political science from the University of Houston. Dr. Ladner is a senior fellow with the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice and the Goldwater Institute. After he speaks, we're going to hear from Jason Bedrick, who is a policy analyst with the Cato Institute's Center for Educational Freedom. Mr. Bedrick has extensive policy research experience, including detailed legislative development and analysis. He previously served as a legislator in the New Hampshire House of Representatives and was a research fellow at the Josiah Bartlett Center for Public Policy, where he focused on state education policy. Mr. Bedrick received his master's in public policy with a focus in education policy from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. His thesis, Choosing to Learn, assessed the scholarship tax credit programs operating in 8 states, including their impact on student performance, fiscal impact, program design, and popularity. He's also the author, along with Jonathan Butcher, of the Goldwater Institute, of a paper called Schooling Satisfaction, Arizona Parents' Opinions on Using Education Savings Accounts, which was published through the Friedman Foundation last August, I believe. And finally, we'll hear from Tim Keller. Tim Keller serves as the Institute for Justice's Arizona chapter's executive director. He joined the Institute as a staff attorney in August of 2001 and litigates school choice, economic liberty issues, and other constitutional cases in state and federal court. Mr. Keller led the Institute's defense of the Arizona Individual Scholarship Tax Credit Program and Arizona Christian School Tuition Organization v. Wynn, which culminated in a U.S. Supreme Court victory. And apropos to today's discussion, he is also the Institute's lead counsel defending Arizona's ESA program. Mr. Keller currently serves on the board of the Phoenix Lawyers chapter of the Federalist Society, is a volunteer lawyer with the Arizona Center for Disability Law, and is an assistant scoutmaster with his oldest son's Boy Scout troop. He received his law degree from Arizona State University and received his bachelor's degree in economics from ASU. He's also the father to 4 sons and somehow manages to read a book a week. So what is it this week that you're reading?
This week it's Unprecedented by Josh Blackman, which is a fun history of the litigation involving Obamacare.
And now you have a reading recommendation for the week. So thank you all for joining us today. Everybody's joined us all the way from Arizona. So this is our West Coast panel today. So thank you very much.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks for having us here. We all have thin. What do they call it? Thin blood, or whatever. It seems really, really cold to us Arizonans here. So, but we're happy to be here. Also, what I want to talk today is there's an old expression about in that social scientists talk about amongst themselves knowingly, and that expression is that in the land of the social science blind, that the demographer is the one-eyed king, right? I'm trained as a political scientist. I know a lot of economists and whatnot, and we may or may not know what we're talking about, quite frankly. Most people won't admit it, but I will. Demographers, they've got their stuff figured out pretty well, okay? It's pretty easy. I don't want to say it's easy, but they've got it down to kind of a science doing population projections and whatnot. And what these I've been digging around a lot into Census Bureau data, and what these projections show us is we have a very, very large challenge in this country that is coming up ahead on a scale that we've never seen before, quite frankly, okay? And this picture here kind of gives you a little preview of what that challenge is. There is going to be multiple states in our country that have gigantic increases in both their elderly population and their K-12 age population at exactly the same time. And this has literally never happened before in the history of our country. So let me flip ahead a little bit and just show you this. This is from the Census Bureau projections of 2030, and this is age demographic data, okay? And so the red columns here are showing you the increase, just the increase, not the total, but the increase of the elderly population, age 65 and up in these states. And the blue columns are showing you the increase in the youth population, 18 and under. Okay, now let me just say that the census basically tracks 2 groups of young people. One is 18 and under. This overestimates the size of the increase into the public school population by a bit because, the age 0 to 3 are almost always out. 4-year-olds are sometimes in through publicly funded pre-K programs and sometimes not and whatnot. They also do 5 to 17. I'll show you some of that. That actually underestimates things, so it's really like somewhere between these 2 numbers, okay? So some of the scariest columns in this chart are the small ones. Okay, so Nevada, if you look at the blue column for Nevada, well, that's just a little dinky 410,000 increase, right? The current size of the public school system in Nevada is 407,000 students, right? So between now and 2030, that kind of looks like an approximate doubling of the size of your public school population. There's nowhere to put these kids right now, right? And what these other figures are showing us, right, is that it's going to be more difficult to come up with the public dollars to do this the way we've always done it before, right? So, for instance, let's take a close look at Florida, okay? If you look at 2010, the youth population, again, this underestimates the potential public school population by quite a bit. 4-year-olds in Florida are eligible for the voluntary pre-K program. 18-year-olds, lots of 18-year-olds are still in the public school system. Children with disabilities sometimes stay in this public school system to age 21. Okay, but in 2010, that's about 2.9 million, and by 2030, that's going up to 4.1 million. Okay, there's absolutely nowhere to put these kids right now. Okay. Well, look over here on the elderly side of things, and what you see is at exactly the same time, there is going to be more than a doubling of the size of the elderly population. Why does that matter to a state? Well, there's multiple reasons. Most people over age 65 are retired. That means they're not in their prime earning years anymore, which means they're not in their prime tax-paying years anymore. Elderly people create a number of demands on public dollars of their own, mostly in the form of health care spending. At the state level, that's mostly Medicaid. Okay, so what we can see in these numbers is a future where public dollars are going to be a more scarce supply, but the demand for them is going to be much larger, right, because of the increase in the K-12 population. How do we resolve this? Basically, we're going to have to resolve this by getting a public school system that is both more effective than it is today and more cost effective. Okay, here in the United States today, Lindsay basically showed you some of these charts. We spend on average about $12,000 per child per year, and about a third of our kids are full grade level proficiency on NAEP, right? That's a system we can't afford, okay? The other relevant thing about these data is that if you think about this in terms of how do you preserve the social welfare state, right? The people who are going to be paying the taxes for the health care and the K-12 and the pensions and everything else in 2030, those people are in the public school system in Florida right now, right? And we can go into the NAEP data right now and see 8th graders, that about a third of them are at full grade level proficiency, okay? The percentage of working age people in every single state in this union is going to shrink. There's going to be fewer of them as a percentage of the population, okay? More elderly people and more children, okay? That means we need a better and cheaper, more cost-effective public school system, okay? Now the good news is that this kind of improvement is actually all over the place, right? It just seems kind of impossible, right, in terms of school. Like, oh, we keep throwing all this money in the public school system, it doesn't get better, right? The reality is that it's normal in life for things to get better and cheaper all the time, right? It's actually, and this is my favorite quote that I've seen lately, because this is a technology enthusiast from Silicon Valley, and, you know, he's frustrated, right? He wants things better, faster, right? I mean, this is so characteristically American, right? This is the pursuit of happiness, right? This, when he was in his, teens or something, he was promised a flying car, and he wants it right now, right? So Mark Perry from the American Enterprise Institute has a series of charts I'll just show you here, and he might say to Bruce, well, Bruce, look, I mean, cars may not be flying yet, but they last a lot longer than they used to. They doubled the gas mileage since the bad old days in the 1970s. Your chance of dying in one has gone way down. And by the way, the price for a new car since, the mid-1990s, the real price has dropped by about half. Cars are cheaper than they've ever been, they're better than they've ever been, they last longer than they've ever been, and they're safer than they've ever been. Now, what do you think Bruce would say about that? I don't care, I want a flying car, right? Okay, how do we get to a flying car in education? Or how about, let's not go crazy here, how about we just get this kind of improvement, right? Why don't we see this kind of improvement in education, right? And I'll skip this stuff, we've been through that. Okay, so our argument is if you want this kind of improvement in education, you have to bring in what's driving it in every other aspect of human life. We need to put voluntary exchange as the basis of our education system to the extent that it is possible. Okay. Now, public education, I think, is a permanent feature of American life. It's enshrined in all of our state constitutions. It has widespread support. That does not, however, mean that we have to run it and finance it as a Prussian 19th century factory model. Okay. We want parents to contract with education service providers. I think the evidence on this is pretty clear from our voucher programs that if we were to do this tomorrow in the broadest scale possible, that the public schools would not empty as a result. A very good example of that is from Florida, the McKay Scholarship Program. Every single child with a disability in Florida has been eligible to receive a scholarship to go to a public or private school of their choice since 2001. Okay, take the money, go. Okay, the result of this is that 6% of children with disabilities in Florida, right, are actually using the program. There's more children with disabilities in the public school system in Florida today than there was when the program passed in 2001. The system is spending more money, it employs more people, it has more students, it's still there, okay? But 100% of children with disabilities in Florida have benefited from the McKay Scholarship Program because they can all leave if they feel like they need to. And that's the key. That's empowerment. That's real empowerment. It's not that you have to leave, it's that you can leave if you want. And when we look at NAEP, what we see is that public school students in Florida have made the biggest gains on academics in the country. Okay? And it's not only because of McKay, there are other policy factors that play there. But they are able to leave what they want. So what we want is not just, to really put parents in charge, but also to give them the broadest array of options possible. The way you do this in the ESA program is instead of giving the sort of school choice 1.0 might be to give you a voucher, which is a coupon, and you could say, okay, here you go, here's your coupon, you can take it to that school, this school, or this school, okay? What the ESA program does is give you an account, and it is controlled by a debit card, okay? And you can do all kinds of different things with it. You want private school tuition? You can use it for that. Do you want to buy individual public school courses a la carte? You can do that if some public schools start participating. They haven't yet, as far as I know. Would you like to enroll your child in a community college? Why not? You can do that. Or about at a university. Or would you like to hire a certified private tutor? Would you like to do online programs? Okay. Would you like to do therapy? Do you want, the possibilities are endless. And the analogy here is between a rotary telephone and an iPhone, right? Rotary telephone is a wonderful piece of technology, right? It's amazing. You can pick up the phone and call someone across the world and talk to them. It's great, right? But it only does one thing. And that one thing is to make a phone call, right? With the ESA, there's multiple things you could do with it, right? If we dream some new way of educating kids, we'll download the app and put it in the program and let people do it, okay? I look at the Arizona program as a prototype. There are a whole host of administrative issues, right? How do you prevent fraud in a program like that? Believe me, we can talk about it. If you guys want to ask about it, we can talk about it. You can do it. It's not easy. No one's, it was a lot more difficult, I'll even say, than, when we passed the program. We appreciated, right? But it's been figured out. How do you do this? The key to all this, as Lindsay said, is that the fact that you can save for future college expenses, right, means that parents are the ones that are economizing, right? If in the future we look at these demographic trends and we say, wow, there's going to, we can't go on spending $12,000 a kid, okay, then the question becomes, who do we want to economize? Do the three of us living in Arizona, do we want bureaucrats and lawmakers in Phoenix to economize for the entire system? No. How about we let parents choose what they want to spend their own money on, right? Let them economize, let them seek the highest value. This really sets the stage for innovation, right? This creates an incentive that a normal school choice program does not, right? The Milwaukee voucher program is my favorite example. It's structured so that it gives you $6,400 voucher is the maximum, or the cost of educating the child, whichever of those two things is less. And they did that for constitutional reasons, right, Tim? Yeah. Every single private school participating in the Milwaukee School Choice Program costs $6,400, right? Of course it does, right? It'd be dumb not to, right? You could structure your costs, your costs based on $6,400. You're leaving money on the table if you don't do that. Well, is this ever going to produce somebody to come in and say, hey, you know what, I've got a great $5,000 program and it's awesome, right? Better, cheaper, right? No, better, cheaper is not going to happen under that, okay? It's not structured that way. This creates an incentive for people to create better and cheaper models because parents are the ones, they have an account, they'd like to put some money away for future university expenses, okay? Right now we've set the correct institutional process by which we can get some improvements. So, yeah, this is just some kind of lessons that we've learned along the way. There does have to be a state oversight of accounts, account monitoring and whatnot. The program will improve, or at least get easier to administer once it reaches a bigger scale, because then you'll actually be able to use what they call product codes. So the way this works now, you know, the state turns on vendors into the program. Like a fateful decision the first year was, do we turn on Walmart or not, right? Caesar's Palace is not an approved vendor, right? And when it gets bigger, poker chips will not, you know, you won't be able to buy. This is very similar to the food stamps program, right? When they passed they started using debit cards and food stamps, the fraud rate got down to 1%, right? Before it was much, much, much higher. Okay, there's an existing set of technology here that we've been able to access, that we'll be able to access in a better way. It's more labor intensive to do this right now until you get to this 4,000 students. So, you know, we probably should have started off with a bigger administration allowance, because the first year was pretty rough. If we'd had 8,000 people rush to this program the way they did in, say, Louisiana, their school voucher program, I'm quite certain it would have melted the state of Arizona down, and the program would have had huge problems. There were all kinds of things to figure out administratively. You know, hey, can I put my kid in a karate class? Can I buy, you know, what do you call those things? Rosetta Stone foreign language program. You know, all this kind of stuff are going on at the same time. It's all been figured out now, and the next state will have an easier time because they'll be able to access things like policy manuals from Arizona. And other states don't have to make all the same decisions, but at least they'll have somewhere to start. So, in concluding, I think, you know, this is kind of how I think of our system right now. You know, it's kind of rolling along, and, you know, I mean, it's not a flying car yet. If we really want a flying car, you know, we've got to think about the institutional and the incentive structures built in our choice programs, but it's definitely possible to get a lot of improvement. Thank you.
This is the third time I've spoken on a panel with Matt and spoken after him, so I clearly haven't learned my lesson yet. But like Matt, I have a PowerPoint, so you have something to look at besides our hairy faces. I concur. Now, Matt did. I like that Twitter quote. We were talking earlier. Twitter is not just 140 characters, right? I mean, 100. There were people in this world that took down regimes 140 characters at a time, right? It was a platform that allowed people to do things that the creators of that platform never imagined were possible. And so I don't know what education is going to look like 50 years after ESA programs are widespread, but I do believe very firmly that this is a platform that is going to allow us to revolutionize the existing education regime in ways that we never thought possible. So what I'm going to be discussing today is the school satisfaction survey that the Frieden Foundation commissioned, that I conducted with Jonathan Butcher of the Goldwater Institute. As we pointed out, so these are bank accounts that parents can use for educational expenses for their children, and you take the state funding, and 90% of it follows the student, 10% remains behind. And that is Walter White, believe it or not. So approximately $3,000 per pupil for non-special needs kids. Now, with kids that do have special needs, which again, the program was started, it was only special needs kids that were in the program. So when we conducted the survey, it was only special needs families. Sometimes can be north of $20,000 per pupil, which again is still less than what the state would otherwise be spending on them, and local money doesn't follow the child. The local money stays where it is in the local district schools. The funds are awarded quarterly, so every quarter there's going to be, just sort of like direct deposit right to your bank account. And you have to submit, parents have to submit their receipts before the next disbursement. So in terms of eligibility, the way the program started, the student had to have attended a public school for 100 days in the previous year, although I believe kindergarten students were automatically eligible from the start in first grade. Right now it's up to, they've expanded the program, so it's students with special needs, students in failing public schools, adopted children, children of military families. Matt, am I missing any?
Not yet.
So you can not yet. You can see it's these different groups don't. It doesn't really make sense, right, from a policy point of view, that because these are very, very different groups. But politically, these were the groups that made, you couldn't oppose expanding the program for these groups. But ultimately, the goal is to expand it so that all children are eligible for the program. So one step at a time. Matt will cook up a few other groups for next year. Lindsay already covered the wide variety of different things that you can do, from private school tuition, textbooks, tutoring, and all that. These are just a list of all the different types of impairments. So we saw that 30% of the students in the program had multiple disabilities. The largest group, 34%, were students that had developmental delays. So how did they actually spend the money? In our survey, we surveyed parents that were participating in voluntarily in this Yahoo group that, again, they just did on their own. This is not required from the program, but more than half of the participants in the program are actually participating in this Yahoo group. So as researchers, it was an easy way for us to find these parents and to survey them. In our sample, there were 65% that were using private schools, so it's pretty similar to what Lindsay found. And in terms of the demographics, it was, Lindsay had data for the entire population. By the time we conducted our survey, the DOE was already they had too many requests for data, and so they stopped giving out data, so we couldn't get it. But our data matched Lindsay's actually quite closely. We also found that about a third were doing things totally outside of the private school system, although we also found that there were many families that were doing private school plus, right? So they had private school, but they were also doing educational therapy. They had private school, they also had a tutor on the side. And then you can see nobody was participating in public school classes, but there were those that were participating in public school extracurricular activities that were saving for college, or that actually were taking, some sort of class at a local college. And in terms of other, what were the other expenses? So like Matt mentioned, karate. Instead of doing a phys ed class, so I'm going to put my kids into a karate class. Braille, there were field trips, so to the Arizona Science Center offers classes, and some families were using that. And then of course speech therapy, swimming therapy. There was, not in our sample, but I know of somebody who did equine therapy. I believe it was a child that had cerebral palsy and had a very difficult time just walking. And there's even a video that somebody produced you can find where the parents are in tears describing how their child can now play on a playground and climb up a ladder and go down a slide because they did this therapy with horses, learning how to ride a horse, and it sort of rewires the brain and helps the child learn how to walk. So these are sort of things that I don't think any of us thought when we were, people were pitching the idea of ESAs. I wasn't that involved, and Matt was, in pitching the idea of ESAs, thought it would do, but this is how people have used this platform in order to better their children's lives. So one of the questions we asked is, okay, what would you do if the ESA was larger? There was actually a proposal which would have expanded the ESA on average about $3,000 per year. So we asked, what would you do with that extra $3,000? Now, again, our sample was families that had children with special needs, so it's no surprise that 70% of the sample said, well, we would use the additional funds for more educational therapy. But beyond that, you see that private school tuition is lower down, 60% said, well, we would hire a tutor. We would use more tutoring services. And then 30% said, well, we would save that additional money for college. So that's a very important part of the program, as Matt explained. One of the fears that we have if vouchers become very widespread is that you would have the same sort of thing we have with Pell Grants, where there's the Bennett effect with Pell Grants, that the tuition is increasing for college, is increasing much faster than inflation. And that's driven by the access to loans, but also the Pell Grants. And so, as Matt noted, if you don't have to spend all the money at once, and you don't have to put it all in one place, you treat it more like your own money. And so you are going to spend it more wisely. You're going to look for the best value, and you are going to try and maximize what you can get for that. So then you have downward pressure on price because you have an actual market. And just moving on, 18% said they would use it for those other purposes that we discussed earlier, and 3% for public classes, all sorts of different things. So how much money did parents spend above and beyond the education savings account funds? Well, there was 24% that didn't spend anything beyond that. 75% spent less than $1,000. There were very few that spent beyond that. There were, again, this is an odd population, or I shouldn't say odd, but this is a not usual population because of special needs, so that there were 3% that spent north of $20,000. Now the most important part, parental satisfaction. One question we asked, what was your satisfaction with your previous public school? And as you can see, they were not very satisfied. About 50-50 that were satisfied with their previous public school, 30% that were very unsatisfied with their previous public school. And now I'm going to show you a mythical creature on par with the unicorn and the jackalope. So buckle up. A government program with 100% satisfaction. Now, you might say, well, of course it's 100% satisfaction. You're giving these people money. Like, what are they going to be dissatisfied about? But there are all sorts of restricted use programs. I mean, just think Medicaid, Section 8, even voucher programs, where we do surveys and they don't get 100%. Vouchers usually get north of 80%. Many are north of 90%. But I don't think if you polled Medicaid recipients and asked them, hey, what do you think about this program? All the paperwork you have to fill out. And don't forget, you have to do a lot more paperwork for the ESA program than you do with, say, a voucher program. But satisfaction is still higher. Well, why is that? Because it allows parents to maximize their value in a way that voucher programs or other sorts of restricted use programs just simply don't allow. So we broke it down by income. This is, again, the question about how satisfied were you with your previous public school. And you'll notice that the lowest income families, that's the line at the bottom, those earning less than $28,000 per year, the lowest income families were the least satisfied with their previous public school. And that makes sense, right? Because if you have more money, you're able to either live in a community that has, you can afford to live in a community that has a higher performing public school, or you can afford to leave. And so lower income families are the ones that are stuck, and we see here that they were the least satisfied. Now, the lowest income families were actually the most satisfied with the education savings account program, with almost 90% saying that they were very satisfied. Not even a single one said they were just slightly satisfied. So we see that it's the lowest income families who benefit the most from education savings accounts. How did they find out about the program? A third found out through a family or friend. A quarter found out through private schools. We'll get into what the 20% that said other. Only 10% found out through the government website. So I think that the state of Arizona needs to do a better job of getting the message out there that this is available for people. In terms of other, the 20%, from their therapist, from a special education lawyer, this online parent support group, in particular the Yahoo group that we mentioned before. How easy or difficult was it to apply? It was actually, Arizona did a pretty good job putting this program together, where the vast majority of families found that it was quite easy to apply for the program. Only 8% said it was slightly difficult. None said it was difficult or very, very difficult. And again, breaking it down by income, we do see that 22% came from that lowest category. So maybe we have to make it easier in some fashion for lower income families to apply. We should study more in depth what exactly it is that they had difficulty with and try and fix that. In terms of using the program, it was interesting. We didn't expect these results, but it was some of the middle and higher income families that said it was slightly difficult to use the program. We have to study this more. Is that because they were just trying to do more things with the program? What exactly was it that was difficult? But the interesting thing here is that the lowest income families said that they had no problem. Only 11% were just neutral. None of them were said that it was even somewhat difficult. So to sum up, there's a variety of uses, 100% satisfaction, low-income families benefited the most, and it's easy to apply and use these programs. And this program, my final thoughts, this is Vouchers 2.0. The trademark is Lindsay's. She gets a nickel every time you use that, that phrase. So you're moving from school choice to education choice, and there's this incentive to maximize value and minimize the price, which is great. But taxpayer money is still extracted and spent. So that's a concern for two reasons. One is constitutional challenges. There are a number of states where they have actually 34, 38 states.
I think the number is 37.
37, see, the lawyer would know, that have Blaine amendments that don't allow public funds to be used at parochial schools. Now, some have interpreted that liberally to allow voucher programs. Others, including Arizona, have not. So this program is currently facing a challenge, and it's going before the state Supreme Court. We're going to see how they rule. But there may be some states that say you can use this, but you can't use it at a religious school. So that would have, I think, a very negative impact on families that want to go and those religious schools themselves. And secondly, regulations. There are a number of people these days that are proposing to add so-called accountability, which is additional, usually test-based regulations to these programs. I think when you have a program like this, what does it mean to be accountable when you're using 3 different service providers, right? When even for one class, you may have 3 different teachers. They're doing all sorts of different innovative things. We don't want to stifle diversity and innovation by adding really unnecessary regulations. So I think one way around this is possibly to fund it through tax credits, especially in those states where the Blaine Amendment would not allow a voucher program. New Hampshire is doing something like this. New Hampshire has a scholarship tax credit program. It's the which is where corporations, or in some cases individuals, donate to nonprofit scholarship organizations, and those organizations fund low and middle income kids to attend the school of their choice. In New Hampshire, though, they also allow homeschooling. So in some ways, it looks very similar to the Arizona ESA model. So thank you very much.
Educational choice is having a real beneficial impact on a lot of real people. This morning I'm going to share some of the stories of those individuals whose lives have been touched and transformed by educational choice. Each of the families I'm going to tell you about are families that I have the great honor of representing in the legal challenge that Jason mentioned to the Arizona ESA program, which is still ongoing. To date, we have prevailed at both the trial court level and the Court of Appeals, and we are waiting to hear if the Arizona Supreme Court is going to accept review of the case. If it does, we are confident that we've got a very good shot at prevailing. The first family I want to introduce you to this morning is the Fox family. I met Crystal Fox in 2008 when I was defending the state's voucher program, a voucher program for children with disabilities. As Jason said, that program was ultimately struck down by the Arizona Supreme Court. But when I met Crystal, her daughter Tia was using the voucher program, and Tia Crystal had been told by a public school teacher that parents who have children like Tia simply pull those children out of the public schools and institutionalize them for the rest of their life. Tia is very severely autistic. She's nonverbal. She has some very difficult behavioral issues as a result of the sensory issues that she has. It was described to me that imagine walking into a very quiet classroom where students are writing quietly with pencils at their desks, nobody's talking. But for Tia, walking into that same classroom would be like walking into a Vegas casino, lights and sounds just bombarding her. So she needs a lot of special education and a lot of special work. But the public schools weren't willing to provide it. But when she got a voucher, Tia was enrolled at a school called Lawrence Institute for Education, and it transformed her life. She was able to sit in a circle with other students. She was able to learn the alphabet using flashcards and identify letters and sounds and animals. It was an incredible turnaround. When the voucher program was struck down, of course, Crystal was devastated. Fortunately, Matt and I and others helped pass a tax credit program named after one of my other clients who I hope to have time to talk about this morning. That tax credit program, unfortunately, was not well funded. It was passed right in the middle of the economic crisis, and it was enough to get Tia a scholarship to stay at Lawrence Institute for Education, but the funding was tenuous from year to year. So when we passed the Arizona ESA program and Crystal would be eligible, I was delighted to sit down with her and tell her that there was now a stable source of funding for her daughter. But when I sat down with her, she said, you know what? As great as this will be for Tia, I'm going to use that money to send her to a new private school. I'm going to transfer her from Life to another school called Chrysalis. And how great is it that she had the ability to change schools so easily like that? She said, but my older son, Austin, is in desperate need of a program like this. I didn't even know this when I met her. She said, my older son, Austin, has Asperger's syndrome. And he's in a public school right now. And he has a 2.0 grade average. And his teachers are sending me emails saying that he doesn't belong here. Because he was sitting in what was referred to in special ed lingo as a mainstream classroom, a regular general ed classroom. They wanted to put him in a self-contained classroom with other kids with very severe disabilities. But Austin has an incredible intellect. So Crystal was fighting very hard to keep Austin in his mainstream classroom. But he hated it so much he was ditching school and he was considering dropping out. So Crystal took this new program back to Austin and said, look, you're eligible for this ESA program. If you do this, we can go find you a new go find you a new school. And so together, Austin and Crystal shopped for schools, and Austin chose Bios Christian Academy. Now, Austin is an atheist, a hardcore atheist, but he saw something in this unique school that he really liked. It's almost set up like a homeschool program where the students do their work at their desks, and if they run into an issue with the work what they're doing, they go talk to a teacher and get some help, and then they come back and finish it. And as they master topics, they're able to progress. So the classroom isn't based on how much time they sit in a particular seat. Once he's mastered a topic, he's permitted to move on. Austin recently took the SAT and the ACT, and he scored in the 90th percentile on both of those exams. He's also got a 4.0 GPA at Bios Christian Academy. Bios has an agreement with one of the universities, Grand Canyon University, for reduced tuition amounts. And so Austin is about to graduate he's currently a senior, he's about to graduate. He has $20,000 sitting in his ESA account because he qualified for about $20,000 a year and did not have to spend that full amount at Bios. So when he graduates, he's going to have that money to attend Grand Canyon University. But and his dream has always been to follow in his mom's footsteps. His mom is a nurse. So he was going to attend GCU's nursing school. But ASU Polytechnic's campus recently visited Bios Christian Academy and met with Austin and discovered that he's a gifted young man who could be perfect for their software engineering program. And they have offered him a full-ride scholarship to ASU to pursue a software engineering degree. And of course, if he does that, that $20,000 ultimately will go back to the state. When was the last time you saw an educational program in 2 years that took a young man from a 2.0 GPA, someone who was about to drop out, to a 4.0 GPA that got him a full-ride scholarship to a school and potentially saved the state $20,000? It's incredible. Next, Tanya Reiner. Tanya is a single mom. She has 2 sons, Judah and Titus. Both of them have fairly severe autism, it's Titus who has symptoms similar to what I described for Tia. Difficult maintaining in a classroom environment that's loud, has a lot of things going on. So she chose a private school called the Ascend Academy, which really focuses on just children with autism. And she's spending the full amount of the ESA for Titus at Ascend. Judah, on the other hand, has the ability to maintain in a more mainstream classroom environment for limited periods of time. So what she's done with him is she's enrolled him part-time in a Trinity Baptist Christian school up in the Prescott area. She homeschools him the rest of the time. And then she uses the money also to hire an aide to sit with him at Trinity. And she uses some of the funds on an occupational therapist because Judah has a very difficult time writing and taking notes. Smart kid. And when he was in the public school, and this was Mom's biggest gripe, the school refused to give him occupational therapy, even though the school knew that he had a very difficult time writing and taking notes. So he was falling behind in all of his classes. Now, both students are doing great. It's a perfect example of the type of customization that's available through the ESA program. Nicole Goodwin. Nicole's son, James, has severe autism, but also is very high functioning. So he's very, very smart, is most likely genius level. But he melts down very quickly in certain environments. And unfortunately, that meltdown can sometimes express itself in aggressive behaviors that made it unsafe for other kids to be around him. So when he was enrolled in the public school system at Paradise Valley recognized this and said, you know what, we know he's very gifted, but he needs some special work. So Paradise Valley, through a federal program called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, enrolled him in a private school. So this is a public school contracting with a private school for James' education. And it was called the High Star Academy. High Star's annual tuition is $35,000 a year. And it was on the complete other side of town. So Paradise Valley also picked up the tab to bus James to this private school. And he was doing great, making tremendous strides, great progress. But then Nicole decided to move out of the Paradise Valley School District and into the Scottsdale School District. And Scottsdale said, we'll evaluate James, and they went out to High Star and they looked at him and saw a young man who was able to maintain in a classroom setting and was doing just fine. So they said, you know what, we don't need to put him in High Star. We can put him in the Scottsdale School District in a regular mainstream classroom, and he'll be just fine. And Nicole was willing to give this a shot. But it wasn't long before they realized they couldn't keep him in a mainstream classroom, so they moved him to a self-contained classroom with a number of children with other disabilities. And James didn't react well there. And so Nicole went to the school and said, you know, we really need to put him back at High Star. And the district refused. And James continued to regress to the point where he really was aggressive at home. Ultimately, he was no longer making learning gains, and so they put him in a very low-functioning, self-contained classroom where they really weren't even working on academics with the students. It was more like a glorified babysitting service. And James was getting so frustrated, he actually started soiling himself intentionally in class to express his displeasure because he had no other way of expressing it to the teachers. Then the ESA program came along, and Nicole got $25,000 and was able to put James back in High Star, including a significant out-of-pocket cost to her, but of course it was worth it. She was able to make up that difference. She was fortunate enough to do that. Now, here's the irony. In Arizona, the teachers' unions are suing to eliminate the ESA program, saying it's unconstitutional. And yet, other public schools are using public funds to send kids to these same private schools. And yet they're trying to take a choice away from somebody like Nicole. Now, when we put Nicole out in the court of public opinion and started telling her story, lo and behold, the Scottsdale School District relented and ultimately agreed that they would pick up the tab. Funny how that works, isn't it? The last individual I'm going to tell you about is Lexi Weck. Lexi is the client I mentioned who the tax credit program was named after. Lexi has cerebral palsy, mild mental retardation, and autism. And when she was born, the doctors told her that she would probably never even walk. She is still verbally nonverbal, but she found her voice through an iPad. So she now can go to her mom and open up the apps and play music videos that express what she's feeling inside, or type in the words that she wants to say if she wants particular something to eat. But thanks to Andre had a very similar experience to Crystal when Lexi was in the public school system. They were trying to figure out the appropriate placement for Lexi, and the school basically said to Mom, we don't know what to do with her. We don't have a program that can meet her needs. And Andre said, well, I know of a private school that can. Will you put her there? And the school district said, no, we won't. Lexi first got the voucher, got to the school, had a tax credit for a while, and is now with the ESA program. So she's doing great. But here's the thing about Lexi. Because the teachers at her private school don't look at her and see all the things she can't do, and instead see all the things that she has the potential to do. This year, she went indoor rock wall climbing. She went bowling. She is in equestrian therapy and becoming a fantastic horse rider. And she danced with her mom at her mom's wedding. It's an incredible story of the power of educational choice. All of these individuals, if they were here right now, would testify that the reason their children are doing so well is because Arizona took the bold step to create the ESA program.
Thank you all so much for great presentations. If you haven't drank the ESA Kool-Aid now, I don't know what will make you drink it, because those were great. We've got about 9 minutes or so for questions, so I'd love to open it up. Yes, sir, in the back. And if you'll just wait on the mic to come around. We have folks watching online.
Thank you. My question is about policy implementation. Educational choice seems to be more of a Republican issue than a Democrat issue. In suburbs, where people tend to vote Republican, moms and dads also tend to be more satisfied with the public education system. How do we convince moms and dads and voters that they need educational choice when they're living in the suburbs? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's been commented on a long time. I mean, the thing is that, you know, there is such a thing as checkbook choice, right? And there are people who have, a lot of people have bought their houses based on the quality of public schooling that's available to them. And so it sometimes comes to pass that these people view choice as some sort of threat. You know, I think that the thing is that I think that will be less the case in the future as more people come to understand choice as an opportunity to customize education for the exact needs of your child. I think the desire to do that is universal. And even in the best performing schools, public or private, every single one of them, I guarantee you, has a couple of kids who could be better off somewhere else, doing something else, you know. You know, there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all school for, you know, that can serve the needs of absolutely everyone. It just doesn't happen. It's not realistic. So I think that the task that we need to get people, and I think these demographic data I showed you speak to that, you know, it's not a zero-sum game, right? In a lot of places, there's way more students than anyone knows what to do with, right? So people need to, like, it's incumbent upon us to make the case that this is not a threat, this is an opportunity, and it's an opportunity to maximize value for taxpayers and to do the best you possibly can for the kids.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that originally Arizona eligibility was only for special needs kids, and then it expanded to include foster children. How large is the push to expand it further? Because I'm sure there are many people who would love to have control over their funds, regardless of what status their kids are, what category they're in. Thank you.
Go ahead, Tim.
Well, there's several bills this session to expand the program. I think the largest expansion would tie eligibility to some percentage above free and reduced lunch. I don't know I don't recall exactly what that percentage is, but basically for low to moderate income families all across the state of Arizona.
I think that there's been some value in us proceeding cautiously. Like I mentioned briefly, figuring out how to administer this program was a challenge at first. I'm very confident now that the authorities have the experience and plans to scale the program up while still maintaining the integrity of the accounts and whatnot. But there was a lot to figure out. So this is yes, with the receipts and this is not a program that those of us in Arizona never approached the school choice donors and begged for a gigantic implementation effort, right? Because we knew we need, there's some things we need to work through here. At this point, I think we've got those things figured out. So I'm hopeful we'll see eligibility expansion and also, just raising public awareness, right? Because the vast majority of the Arizona public still doesn't know this program exists.
Actually, on that point, in New Hampshire, which is not an ESA, but it's a scholarship tax credit program, the scholarship organization, the first year there was only one, it was sort of a blessing that the program was very small in the first year, and that happened sort of because there was a lawsuit, unsurprisingly, and a repeal effort, and that kept the program quite small. So in a way it was a blessing because they also had to go through, well, what do we do with these receipts, and how do we determine which things are allowed, which things are not allowed, and they had to work very closely in that state with the Department of Revenue in order to figure out those things. But now that they have it figured out, moving forward, it should be a much smoother process.
Hi, Israel Tay with the Heritage Foundation. This question is for anyone on the panel. I was wondering if you give more thought to sort of the educational component of ESA, thinking on a larger scale. Matt, you mentioned the Florida example in the K scholarship, only 6% of people who are eligible signed up for it. So I'm wondering whose role is it to sort of educate people about the debit card and how to, and why, it makes sense for their families?
I think that it's an ongoing effort. There's no one individual group, I guess, that is solely in charge of trying to do that. The Alliance for School Choice has put some effort into it. The Goldwater Institute has put some effort into it. And this is kind of the normal course for a choice program. It starts off small and it gets bigger unless there's a really big effort, which we didn't do at first for the reasons I've described. So, and it'll grow organically, right? Just through word of mouth. I think your survey data showed that. So, but it does need to expand. And it needs to expand quickly. I didn't talk about the demographic numbers from Arizona, but they're terrifying. They're very similar to Florida's. Very large K-12 population increase on our way. We have about 1 million, K-12 students right now, and we've got, I think it was 600 and something thousand new K-12 age kids on the way, and there's nowhere to put them, right? So, we do need to get people to understand that if someone snapped their fingers tomorrow and tried to abolish the Arizona public school system, there would be nowhere to put those million kids, okay? But the question is where are these next million going to go? Where are the next million Arizona public school students going, and how are they educated, and who do we want to decide that, and how much freedom do we want to give them, right? I want to give parents in charge of the system, and ultimately I think the goal here should be, one of the reasons I really want other states to create new programs and to try things like a tax credit funded program that Jason mentioned, there's so many different variations this program could take, and we're really just scratching the surface here in Arizona. Where we ultimately need to go, in my opinion, is to not structure this thing as a traditional public school choice or school choice program, right? What I'd like to see at some point is all K-12 funding go into a parental controlled account before it goes anywhere else, right? In other words, let's set the default as you have to make choices. You have to think about the individual needs of your child. If you want to take all that money and go and contract with the district school down the street from you, that's fine. That's your choice. If you want to do some combination or hybrid program or go to a private school or whatever, I think the result of that would be like that I described in McKay in Florida, only much more powerful, right? Because you'd see a lot more customization. You would see the school system catering much more to the needs of the parents because the parents would really be in charge of the system.
Sounds like you need to get AARP on board. I think we have time for one more question. Yes, sir, in the front.
Thanks for coming. My question is, I believe strongly that these decisions should be made at the state and local level, but is there anything at the federal level that is a roadblock or inhibiting this innovation at the state level, and what might be able to be done at the federal level to encourage this?
I think the big roadblock, which is not exactly federal, is Common Core. That's a national push to have national standards where the feds have actually stepped in and coerced through Race to the Top funding and the withholding or granting of waivers preconditioned on accepting Common Core for the most part. So I think that's a problem. I think right now we're on the cusp of revolutionary change where we're going to be able to tailor education to meet the individual needs of individual children. And so it doesn't make any sense whatsoever at this point in time to say, well, what we really need to do is to have one uniform standard for every single child. I can understand there are some researchers, it's their dream because, well, now we can compare apples to apples. But of course, children aren't apples. Children are, if you've met two children, you know that children are very, very different and have very different needs. And so we think that parents are in a much better position to decide what's best for their kids. Again, parents will make mistakes, but I think it would be a much bigger mistake to try and put all kids into one box, and that's essentially the way that we're moving right now, and we have to oppose that.
It's always the case that we should understand private choice programs as an opt-out of the public school system, not an extension of the public school system into the private sphere. So I agree. It is not the job of a private choice program to teach the state standards nor to give the state's tests. That has an homogenizing effect. In Arizona, if you want the Common Core test or whatever they want to call it, we don't even know what the assessment's going to be in Arizona. But if that's what you want, if you want the state test, if you want the state standards, there are currently 2,265 different options for you to choose between in form of district and charter schools. If you want something else, then you should be free to have something else. And, we could talk about providing some form of transparency in that, but that transparency should not be in the form of a state test and state standards.
And I'll just add, for both reasons that sort of are defined by federalism and pragmatic reasons, this has to happen at the state and local level. 90% of all ed funding is state and local funding. So just practically, it's got to happen at the state and local level. Well, let's give a hand to our panelists. Great presentation.